Nice group here, and you're going to have an opportunity. Thanks for being here. You have an opportunity to hear something new, challenging, interesting, and hopefully something that feeds you into your career and to the coming years for you. I want to first of all thank our partners, and as you can see on behind me, we have a number of partners who help to get the word out. While I come from the Institute for the Built Environment, I'm Brian Dunbar, this is an event and a message that we understand transcends the built environment and goes into many other facets, in fact all facets of human life on the planet. So in keeping with that, it wasn't enough for us to reach out to our built environment partners, but instead to reach to people who maybe have similar philosophies when it comes to the importance of taking care of the planet and the importance of understanding our place on the planet, thinking about planetary conditions, the concept of sustainability, and how that relates to so many different disciplines. So as you see behind me, a wide array of partners, both on campus, off campus, including the city of Fort Collins, and on campus, I want to especially thank the School for Global Environmental Sustainability for creating our poster that we sent out and many of you had a chance to see. So thanks a lot to our event sponsors and partners. I have the pleasure of introducing someone who has inspired me for years. This week we've been visited by two people who are on a journey themselves, and they're looking for places that leave a positive legacy. They're talking about places that design for hope. Chrisna du Plessis is an architect and associate professor in the School of the Built Environment at the University of Pretoria. She is here with her co-researcher, Dominique Hess. Dominique, raise your hand for us. Dominique is from the University of Melbourne and is on a sabbatical and chose to come to the United States to certain places to study ideas and places that provide this contributive idea of leaving a positive legacy. They chose Fort Collins for a couple of reasons. Our Institute of the Built Environment has created a framework called Lenses that talks about going beyond sustainability and what a living environment could be. And we talk about regeneration. Also, they knew that there are some special places around the region, and they've had, since Saturday, they've had the opportunity to visit places like Kennard Middle School and New Belgium Brewing and the Engines Lab at CSU, and interview a number of people associated both with our institute and our Lenses work, and people that are associated with the projects that they've been looking at, including Rocky Mountain Inosphere. Today we had an opportunity to visit the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. Did you know there's botanic gardens in Cheyenne? And did you know there's a children's village that is pretty amazing in the Botanic Gardens? Thanks to a couple people here who've worked on that project. So Chrisna is a recognized architect, but more than that, she's a leader in the sustainability movement, or I should say, a leader in helping the people in the sustainability movement realize there's more to come, a higher level of thinking and working with that. Her message isn't sugar-coated. Her message is, and this is what I think hit myself and some of my co-workers a number of years ago, she talks about the need, the situation, and the possibility. So there's a few things you'll get in her message. I can tell you that professors and students around the world have also been inspired or even transformed by the message from Chrisna. Hey, if you're in the GES 580 class, raise your hand. Okay, so as you look around, there's 20 students here from across the campus, mostly graduate students, and they're in a class called Issues in Global Environmental Sustainability. It happens to be class time right now, and so we moved our class to right here. And then we invited others to join in our class when we found we had a pretty interesting guest speaker. So those students, I will tell you, I'll look to you to ask some compelling questions at the end of Chrisna's talk, so stay tuned. Paul, were you able to bring some of your students along? Do you know if you're with Paul Hudnut's class? Okay, there's some of those students here as well from the Global Social Sustainability Enterprise. Okay, thank you. Good, all right. They're not all raising their hands real high, but they're maybe still wondering why they're here, but Paul said it's worthwhile. Other students, raise your hand. Great. You came to the right place. You're in the right place for the moment. You're in one of the best places you can be. I'm going to ask you to think of questions. And not just students, but particularly students. And I'm going to encourage you to listen carefully tonight for two reasons. Her message is important to each of us. And she has a beautiful accent. And it requires careful attention. And so with that, I'd like you to help me welcome to Fort Collins and to CSU, Chrisna du Plessis.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I hope that I live up to the expectations that Brian has been creating as he kept on telling people to come to the lecture. I'm just going, okay, more pressure. So I hope that you will not be disappointed. And I also want to thank him for giving me this opportunity to share some of my, in a sense, very personal ideas and my personal philosophies and journey in life. Now, you've heard him talk about Dominic and I going on this crazy journey throughout the United States, looking for examples, looking for practices, looking for things that would inspire the generations to come as well as us. Now, Dominique is still very optimistic. I tend to go, as the grey hair comes in, I become a bit more jaded and pessimistic. And then you see something amazing, like the Cheyenne Children's Village we saw this morning. And I have hope again. There's something in the air. And it sits in each and every little contribution. So we've been looking at all these wonderful places, speaking to very interesting and intriguing people like Stephen Kellett, who you might know with his work around biophilic design and the idea of biophilia. Bill Reed, who is one of the co-thinkers that started this term of a regenerative world, regenerative development. And of course, we came to see Brian. We spoke to Bob Berkebile in Kansas. Or Kansas City. I found out now suddenly that Kansas City is not in Kansas. I don't understand the United States. Maybe at some stage I will. But we went to Kansas City and had the privilege of hearing some really inspiring stories there. And then we came and speak to Brian and his team and the work that they are doing and the tool that they are developing, or the framework for thinking that they are developing, that I think is actually at the forefront of how we engage with the complexity of the issues that we are facing in this broader sustainability debate. So we had a whole set of things that we're looking at. You can see there's the High Line up there. There's some pictures from other places that I've been to that to me represents some of these ideas that we're going to do. It's a garden in Morocco, the idea that we how do we bring nature into our environments? How do we help nature to rejuvenate and regenerate us? And also, how do we use it to create microclimates so we don't need air conditioning systems? There's Mexico City, and the idea of a city that has seen a succession of cultures and civilizations and still managed to support it even though there are these enormous problems that sit within that city and the resilience that underlies Mexico City. There's the ideas of things like the museum, the Branly Museum in Paris, with its wonderful, inspiring green walls, this wonderful lush greenness that we see. And then there are the things that we get from nature. And we've been inspired by nature ever since human beings first had eyes to think consciously, or the brains to think consciously. We've had it in our architecture, and you'll find examples like the leaf patterns there in old Gothic architecture, in Greek architecture, in Egyptian architecture. So we've always tried a way to bring nature into the way that we do our buildings. And then the picture that you'll see there of the ILO that is being regenerated is, to me, and you'll see it again in this presentation, a true symbol of what it is that we are dealing with here. And I'll come to that a bit later on. Then there's also the idea of nature taking back from us. So this is a picture of a little detail on a bridge in outside Yale, where Stephen Keller took us for a walk to, walk the dog. We end up walking a lot of people's dogs on this trip, which was fun. But the idea that you have this bridge structure that's made out of man-made iron, and we've taken all these minerals out of the soil. And if you look carefully, you'll see that nature is starting to take it back. Nature is starting to use that bridge as nutrients again. So we become part of that loop. It's not like we just go out and we put these industrial things down on the countryside, and that's the end of it. If we allow nature, she actually makes use of our structures. And the last picture is, it's called the desert tulip. It's a flower that flowers in the Karoo desert of South Africa, which is an extremely arid landscape. People were telling me that Wyoming is just grass dunes. No, the Karoo is grass dunes covered in thorns. But then, when it has rained, in those few times in the year, and the Karoo gets about 20 to 50 millimeters of rain. Now, I don't know how much is a millimeter in your language, but it's very little. You can measure it with a medicine dropper. But that's all. That little bit of moisture is all that is needed for this amazing flower to appear. And in a sense, that is all that we need, is to remember that despite all the bad things we see in the world, the way that the world is, we look at all this environmental degradation, and it is a really hopeless picture that we see in front of us. But there is this ability to, with the slightest amount of help, the slightest bit of nourishment, the slightest bit of watering, of care, to regenerate and to grow again. So that is a little bit of the message that I want to bring. This is also taken in the Karoo, not far from this little flower. And we are on this pathway that we've been on. Some people would say it's the Industrial Revolution. Some people will say it started the first time humans decided to settle down and started agriculture. But we've had a major impact on the natural environment, or what we see as the natural environment, that thing that we tend to see as separate from us, that we inhabit, that we use, that is there for us as a resource, that we steward if we're a little bit more conscious of things. And what we are seeing now is that we are getting to a point where, we've been talking and talking and talking, and the climate change debate has been going since 1867. And we somehow don't take this in. But I want to remind you of Winston Churchill's words just before the Second World War, where he's also had a situation where for many years, for a decade, his colleagues have been looking at Hitler and looking at what was happening in Germany and saying, maybe it's not that bad. It's not there, it's not our problem, it sits in Europe. But maybe he's right. Maybe there's some money to be made out of this. Until it got to the point where they suddenly realized, but hang on, we are in deep trouble here. And a war is here. It is on our doorstep. We have entered the period of consequences. And that is where we are now. Over the past few years, we've had more and more evidence of global warming starting to mess things up. We are starting to experience more and more natural disasters, fires, droughts, funny weather, weird weather. Things that tell us that we are now in this period of consciousness, of consequences. And that it's no longer something that we can defer to the next generation. And we are in essentially a place where there are many tipping points. We are very close. We've crossed some tipping points already, and we are very close to crossing some other tipping points that may spell disaster. But, people survive going over the Niagara Falls. And we will do that too, if we do the right things now. And that is what regenerative thinking is about, and what it is that we are trying to explore is, what are those things that we can start thinking about, that we can start changing, that will help us to survive this fall. And the sad thing is that we have to accept some things. We can no longer avoid this and say, well, this is not going to happen. This is coming. Things are going to get much worse before it gets better. Unfortunately, we have left things too late for us to make a very smooth transition. And once we can accept that, we know that we can start preparing for it. We know that we can start putting things in place that will help us to smooth out the edges, to ride the rough waves. But we won't put those things into place if we are not prepared to accept this. And we as humans, we don't really like to accept these kind of things. We always want the pretty picture. We want the fairy tale. We want to say, well, no, it'll all work out in the end. And it will all work out in the end. It might just not work out the way we'd like it to. The other thing we have to accept is that we are all in this together. I think it's for the part of the world where I come from, the developing world, it's still a message that hasn't really sunk in. They still think that somehow they will be separate from all of this and can continue using whatever resources there is, pushing up emissions into the air because they want to play catch-up to something which is inherently unsustainable. And our leaders have not really cottoned on to the fact yet that, this is kind of sitting there at the COP meetings, the climate change meetings, and having these debates around whether we will be allowed to continue emitting while America has to cut down its emissions because it already had its chance to emit. That's kind of like negotiated suicide. Because you just setting a situation in place that will end up very bad for your own people. And unfortunately, it will be the people in developing countries, and particularly in Africa, that will be the hardest hit. But that's not going to go through until we realize, all of us, that we are in this together. And I think that also goes for some of your politicians. The third thing we have to realize is that it is our responsibility. We are the generation. We cannot defer this responsibility to the next generation. If we look at how close we are to certain tipping points, there are some people who've done modeling and so on and say that, in essence, if you are under 17 years of age at the moment, you have no say in what is going to happen. You will have no influence on the changes that the world is going to experience because the things that we are putting in place now are going to happen. What they will have the ability to do is how to respond to what is coming. And part of what we need to do is to give them the tools and the ways of thinking that will help them to deal with what is coming. To teach them how to live in a better way, to learn from our mistakes. But we cannot sit there any longer and say, oh, the next generation will solve this problem. Because most of you who are sitting here as students, you are already the third generation of the first people who said in the 60s, this is coming. So we've already seen 3 generations who've deferred this. We cannot afford to defer it to the next generation because they will not be able to do anything. Now, so our question here is, if we look at what we're happening, if we know that there are certain things that are inevitable, that are in some cases almost irreversible, and that may be irreversible over very long time spans, is how in this new world that we are creating, do we go about recreating an abundant world? And what do we mean with that abundance? One of the people that I said we visited earlier on is Bill Reed up in Boston. And he has been involved in a group called Regenerative who've come up with this particular model and say, but hang on, we need to understand where we are. We can either evolve up towards something that will regenerate, or we can devolve to something that degenerates. And that we're pretty much going down the degeneration thing in large parts of our economy. For most of us sitting here, because simply the fact that you are here says that you are interested in going that regenerative route. Now, conventional practice tends to still sit there at the bottom. And that conventional practice depends on whether you are in the construction industry, when you're building, or whether you are an industrialist, or whether you just simply, go home, drive your nice big truck, switch on the big screen TV, put your six-pack down, eat your reconstituted molecules that you call food. That's conventional practice, and it is degenerating where we are going. Most of what we are currently see as green still sits below the line. Yes, we might need a little bit less energy, but it's not really helping us to escape that degenerating spiral. And what we have to realize that sustainable is neutral. It is not something up there, it is the neutral line. It is the line that says this is what we have to maintain. Not the line that says, oh, this is what we have to aim for. It is the line that we have to maintain for our basic survival. That is where sustainable sits. So you can see that most of what we're doing still sits below that line. Now, if we start looking at restoration, restoring our communities, restoring our landscapes, restore still goes back to what things were before. We are trying to get it back to a way it was before. And as we now see, things are going to change. So does it make sense for us to restore things? Or should we aim for regeneration, which is to create something new out of what we have at the moment, to create new life, to create a new beginning? So if we are walking this path, where do we start? And once again, I get this is part of a conversation that what the group of people that I call the regenerates have amongst ourselves, is that the first step on this path is not necessarily changing our techniques, getting better solar panels, putting up wind turbines, putting in more insulation, getting all these very fancy energy management software systems going. They're cool, they're great, they're very necessary. But the first step is a change of mind. And it's more than that, it's also a change of heart. What do I mean with that? Is when we talk about a change of mind, it means that we literally have to step back and look at the world very differently. We need to change our worldview. And our worldview is that set of stories we tell ourselves about how the world works, where it comes from, how it's created, where it is going, what is true, what is beautiful. What are the ways that we should act? How should we act? What is our ethics and our morals? All of that stems from our worldview. And once you have changed the worldview, you can start changing the value system, you can start changing the goals of the system, all those rules that we put in place, and those things start enforcing and changing actions, and eventually it will change the kind of tools we use. It changes our technologies. But at the moment, the work that we are doing in sustainability sits around developing the tools and the technologies. And there may be a little bit around, can we get a different way of doing things, which is essentially what a paradigm is. A paradigm is that set of rules that a community has to say, well, this is how we do things. These are the kind of problems that we're trying to solve. And we are doing that with things like our assessment systems, with our energy legislation, with water legislation, and those are all good things. But at the end of the day, they are not enough. If we really want the kind of meaningful shift in the world that is going to see the next generation survive what is coming, we need to change our worldview. Which means that we need a new story. Our current story is very much one where we say, okay, now nature is this terrible thing. It's full of insects and thorns, and it's scruffy, and it's, in Afrikaans we have a word, deurmekaar. It's very confused and going all over the place. And we don't want that, because it makes us feel afraid. We don't see where the snakes are coming. And, you know, there may be lions hiding behind the bush. And there's mosquitoes, and we might get dengue fever. But, you know, there's also frogs, and we don't like frogs. They're icky. We definitely do not like snakes. So we want to get rid of all this nastiness, and we want to make the world nice and neat and predictable. You can lay it out there. You can see where you are going. It's all nice straight lines. Engineers should be very happy. And this is the world where we are. And in a way, our world is, the worldview that we have at the moment is very much an engineering worldview. We have a problem, we try to solve the problem. Oh yes, this problem creates consequences, it creates problems. So now we try and come up with little solutions for each of these problems. And now each of these little problems make another little set of problems. Oh, okay, now we get more gizmos and gadgets to solve those little problems. Instead of just going back and saying, you know, the way that we're doing things here at the beginning, that design, scrap. It's also a way of saying we can control. We can fix things. We can predict behavior. And unfortunately, nature does not work that way. It has a way of invading our space. And it does that because we are not that separate from nature. And that's what the story is all about. It is about rediscovering and remembering that we are part and parcel of nature. We are nature. And that we are in relationship. And this is in many ways not such a new story. If you look at our science, whether we're talking from quantum physics right up to cosmology, some really interesting things are starting to come to the fore around how the world works, how it's really put together, what the real laws of nature are. And then we look at things at our biophysical or our biological sciences, from biology up to ecology. And there are a lot of things that sits within these sciences that are coming together, certain very common themes. And if you step back a little bit and you go and talk to our indigenous knowledge systems, the keepers of our traditional knowledge, you look at some of the world's biggest religions, and you find out that hang on, we actually know all this stuff. It sits there. The knowledge is there. We don't need to invent a new story. We just need to remember the true story. And this true story is that it's all about relationship. And it's all those relationships. It is the nice, warm and fuzzy relationships. It is our relationships with what is happening around us in terms of our, you know, how we look at water, how we deal with our food, how we deal with our mechanical devices, because they're actually also part of the system. But it's also those relationships that we tend to feel a little bit icky about, you know, those predator-prey relationships. And we have to start acknowledging that all of those relationships are part of life. They are part of what allows the flow of life. And that we are part of a living system. We've been trying to operate this planet as if it is a machine, a spaceship, when it is a living system. And the key of a living system is relationship, because relationship allows flows. Without flow, something dies. If your blood stops flowing, you die. If ideas stops flowing in a university, it dies. If ideas stop flowing in a community, that community will die. If the water stops flowing, all of it, the nature around us, all our other creatures that we co-inhabit this particular place with, will also die. So we need those flows. And the key thought behind this, and there's three things that I'm going to tease out. There's a whole set of other things around, and I was telling Brian that I had all these slides and realized you walk out here with your head spinning. So I'm going to keep it to three things, or three themes. And the first is interdependence. It's the notion of how that we are not just interconnected, and we now understand the interconnectedness. You know, we go on Facebook and you go on Twitter and you talk to your friends in Australia and Japan and China, and you know, you can now even Facebook and Twitter people in Antarctica. So we are connected globally as a society. We are also realizing with things like climate change that we are connected as a global planetary ecosystem. But it's not just about the connections. It is about the fact that those connections make us interdependent. We rely on those connections. If all the bees die off, we've got about 4 years left before most of us will die of starvation. And we don't think about those little things. I still have to find out what mosquitoes are good for, but maybe, as I said to somebody, it is to control the human population. The key thing is that we are a part of nature. And we tend to think of our built environments, our cities, our houses, our buildings, as things that we have created. And we can put this nice little isolation around them and have these windows that don't open. And, you know, we can keep all this nasty heat and cold and all the insects and the snakes and the burglars and everything else out. But we are part and parcel of nature. It sits within us. We actually have more foreign organisms in the shape of mites and bacteria in our bodies than we have human cells. So we are not isolated. We are just another ecology within a broader ecology. And the spaces we create are part and parcel of that ecology, and we need to start seeing them as part of that ecology. And if we are a part of nature, we better start acting like we are nature. And that's where things who of you have heard of biomimicry? School hands, I'm blind. Fair amount of you. Biomimicry is basically the idea that we learn from nature. That nature has been inventing all these wonderful ways of solving problems like energy generation and water treatment and designing very good, simple structures, and that she's done all of this at temperatures that are conducive to life and that doesn't pollute. So maybe we should go and learn from nature. You know, go revisit and see how can we take that lessons in the way and take it forward to the ways that we are doing it. But it goes further than just that biophysical interaction. And this is where it starts becoming a little bit woo-woo. You know, it's a bit airy-fairy. You know, those of you who might get uncomfortable with this kind of stuff, just hang on there for a moment. But what this interdependence means is that the world is an extension of the self. In many, many ways. We are not us and the world out there. There is almost no stop. There's no place where we stop. If you think about your body and you think your skin, you know, this is a barrier. But it's not really. Things come in, things go out. You're not that divorced. We're all sitting here and we're breathing each other's air, each other's breath. And the breath that we are breathing in as this group, most likely has at some stage passed through the lungs of a dinosaur. So we are connected in space and in time. But we are also connected at a very deep, fundamental level. And as if you start talking to the people of quantum physics, they say, at that quantum physics level, there is no separation. There's just this field of energy. And that what we see as our real entities, the chair that you're sitting on, it doesn't really exist in that field. It is just a field of potential. And somehow, through some strange mechanism which we don't understand yet, something happens where in that field things start coalescing. They start making little nodes, and that nodes eventually becomes the kind of things that we see as molecules, as atoms, and all those atoms are floating there all around, and they're creating force fields between them. And that's what gives you the illusion that you're sitting on this very solid chair. But actually, neither the chair nor you is very solid. And that there's no real separation in the quantum field. You're still part and parcel of the quantum field. You just popped up in different places in this field. So we're connected at that very deep fundamental level. And then you start talking around issues like entanglement. What scientists have found is if two of these subatomic particles that at any stage come into contact have been in relationship with one another, and they're then removed from one another, what happens to this one is felt by this one, is experienced by this one, doesn't matter how far apart they are, and instantaneously. So it starts making you think about a lot of things around how we are connected to things. And we are connected in terms of our souls, and that is more or less where some of the biophilia thing comes from, is that we've got this deep need to feel connected to nature, to feel that we are part and parcel and reconnect with all these other living beings. But it also goes into things like, how do we connect with things that we tend to think of as inanimate, like water? If you are familiar with Masaru Emoto's experiments around water, the idea is that water has memory and that it can carry and reflect emotions. And he's done a series of experiments where he was taking photographs of water crystals after he's played music, like classical music or rock music, exposed it to certain thoughts, to beautiful pictures. And the consistent finding is that certain things like pictures of nature, classical music, thoughts of love, thoughts of gratitude, creates beautiful formed crystals like this. Heavy metal, negative thoughts, polluted water, water that has flown through pipes, don't create crystals. They just make these kind of formless blobs. And it starts making you think, even though if you're still a little bit skeptical about all of this, you have to start thinking about, how does this relate to me? If it has this effect of water and I'm made up of so much water, how does my thoughts change my own bodily constituency, the health of my body? So we're sitting there very connected at our fundamental levels as well as our immediate psychological levels and our biophysical bodily levels. And that starts telling us how we should act. Because if you start looking at the world as not separate from you, but as part of your extended self, then how would you treat that world? How would you treat yourself? And it comes back to this wonderful golden rule, which is part and parcel of most of the world's religions. They all have it somewhere in here. Very simple, if you can just treat other people as you would like to be treated. Because in effect, all those others, and whether those others are other people, or other nations, or plants, or the dog that walks down the road, or the driver that's irritated you, they are all part of yourself. So it starts putting a different sense of how you engage with the world in place. And it also starts telling us what the outcomes of our action should be. Now, this is the picture that we took this morning in the Cheyenne Children's Village. And if you haven't been there yet, I strongly encourage you to go. It is a most inspiring place, and it's not just for small children. We grown-ups really enjoyed it as well. But the key thing of this particular project was that they've hit all the buttons of what you should be if you're exploring a regenerative world and a regenerative path in the world, what your action should be. And it means that you should contribute to well-being, to health, to happiness, to making your community better. You should contribute to nourishment, whether it is growing your own food or whether it is providing nourishment of the soul through art or through creating beauty. Regeneration, taking something that is sitting there and it is not living up to its full potential and allowing it to emerge to something that is of high potential, that has this potential for beauty, the potential for nourishment, and to create well-being. But most importantly also, it should contribute to resilience, to the ability to bounce back, to adapt, to absorb changes, and still continue to provide well-being, nourishment, and regeneration. Then I started stopping my lecture around value systems at this point because we went this morning to the New Belgium Brewery and they have a pillar that says the Church of Fermentology. And I strongly suggest you all go and visit the Church of Fermentology because what they have up there, their first 7 or 8 values, is very much the value system that I would have put up here, almost word for word. Make sure that there are flows. Look after your relationships. Be accountable for what you are doing. So I'm not going to do much of the values preaching anymore. I think you'll have much more fun doing it at New Belgium Brewery. And you are very privileged to have such a place in your own town. The second concept that comes out of this is the notion of emergence, of how things come into being because of relationship. And I already started talking about the interactions at the quantum level that leads to the formation of atoms, subatomic particles, coming together, creating molecules, creating compounds that ends up becoming our mineral world, our water, our soils, the air that we breathe, as well as the biological component, the cells that creates things like our trees and the world, and together these combine to create our planet. And what happens at this point is every time you have an interaction, an organization that happens at one level, that through that organization starts creating something that is much more than those entities would be on their own. And that comes into being and creates something that you cannot predict from the properties of what is happening there. But it is one of the central rules of how things come into being in this world, is that relationship between things self-organizing, coming into relationship, doing things together, reacting to one another, and out of all of that, something else emerged that you would not have been able to predict. And that emergence tends to go to higher levels of complexity, and many people would say to higher levels of consciousness. So in this whole process, you end up with a world that is fairly responsive, and this is the third aspect of things that come in, is that it's a dynamic relationship. But how things play out, you cannot necessarily predict. And sometimes very small effects can have very large consequences. And I'm sure all familiar with the idea of the butterfly effect. So that also makes us think about our own actions. What you do. How does that change what is happening? And will that be a negative effect or will it be a positive? Are you putting something in place to change for the better? And I think our social changes, or the kind of positive changes that we want to put in place, can play as much and make as much use of this concept of emergence and of small effects having very large consequences eventually. And out of this, the last thing is, out of this emergence and this dynamic changes that you can't really predict, comes the third theme, and that is change. It's the story of the planet, is change. We try to keep things the same. We talk about reaching a sustainability goal. Now, finally, when we get to this goal, we will be there and, we can pat ourselves on the back until the next thing hits us. Because things keep on changing. So there's no sense in trying to goal set in a world where things keep on changing. Rather, we should start thinking, how do I go with the flow? How do I adapt to what is happening? How do I make sure I have the ability to respond, that I have resilience built into the system, that there's diversity so that if one thing fails, something else can take over that function? How do I build these kind of things into my system? But the main thing with change is that it starts with you. Now, we tend to sit and give away our responsibility and also our ability to act. We give away our agency. We say, you know, it's somebody else. The government has to figure this out, and the government has to make all these laws, and you know, the banks have to sort it out so that I can get the money. And I have to wait for somebody else to do it. It's always somebody else's problem. It's the industrialists, it's the developed world, it's somebody else that has to change what they are doing if we want to get the kind of change we want to see. And it doesn't really work that way, because governments change because of pressure from the bottom up. Lots of people, that principle of self-organization, lots of independent agents coming together and saying, I want this change, starting to put pressure on the government, on whether it's your local government, whether it is your national government, your federal government. Part of that change is in how you vote. Part of it is in what you buy. You know, do I support certain businesses that have ethics that are counter to life and counter to thriving a world? Those are the kind of choices you can make, and those choices add up. Each and every little one of them add up. And I think that is one of the key things that come out in the projects that Dominique and I have been visiting, is how people just decided, we are going to do this. They didn't wait for a law. They didn't wait for something. They found very creative ways of going around laws and getting people to change in small parts or sort of circumvent some of the more insane laws and regulations. They didn't wait for somebody else to take responsibility. They went out and they said, I want to do this. And they found a way to do it. And some of them did it in very practical ways. Some of them are people who are simply thinkers. And in the way that they think, start creating that kind of thoughts in other people's heads, in the heads of the doers. The people who all go out there and say, hang on, I've never thought about it this way. And that can also be your role. I personally, I'm a thinker. Dominique is a great doer. So we make a great team. She has all this wonderful experience, and I just sit there and come up with the thinking and the theories. Not that she doesn't do any thinking, make no mistake. But I think there's a place for each and every one of us. And whether your role is just, this is a photograph that Dominique took earlier in this week. In what street was it? It's not Mulberry, it's just off Mulberry. Oh yes, walking around the lake. She came across there was a crack in the pavement, and this guy who has to fix the pavement put in a little flourish. Small contribution. But he put a smile on her face, it's putting a smile on your face. It is creating beauty in an unexpected place. So it doesn't matter who you are, what power you have, how much money you have. You can make that difference. You can create a world that is more beautiful, that is thriving, that is abundant, that is regenerative. And where it comes from is the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke writes this wonderful poem about, I live my life in widening circles that reaches out across the world. And you have no idea where the ripples of your actions are going. Now, this guy who has now been putting his little flourish on the pavement has no idea that that action of his is now going to be inspiring audiences across the world as Dominique and I travel and speak. So he has no idea that that is the ripple effect that he's created with that small action. And each and every one of us have that potential and that possibility. Because in the end, we choose the kind of world that we live in by choosing how we live in the world, by our own actions. We're creating this world. And we can choose to change it if we don't like the way things are going. Making your own small contribution, making your own small transformation, your personal transformation. We all need a vision. this is a story that I don't really tell much about myself. I went on a vision quest a few years ago, and I know some of you may be aware of the idea of the North American vision quest. Now we have people in South Africa doing them as well. And this is the Cedar Mountains, which is a very inhospitable part of South Africa. It's really arid. It's a bit like what would be like the Arizona desert. I would think it's real arid desert area. So I had my little spot, and I was quite fine. And then one night, the storm started coming up. And I thought, I better make a plan. So I cobbled together this little tent with my ground sheet. And of course, it was extremely warm, and it didn't rain. Well, not on me. It rained right around me, but it didn't rain on me. And I sort of thought about this and think how easy it is for us to become scared. To say, well, things are too big. I am now under threat. So I'm going to retreat into my little shell. Doesn't matter how imperfect my little shell is and how ridiculous my little shell is, because it's not really protecting me from any of this. Instead of just trusting, I was saying, you know, if I go there and I say, this is the way that I want the world. I want to create this beautiful place. I want to feel safe. And trusting that the universe will conspire. But part of this vision quest is, of course, that you need to come up with a vision. So I want to share with you my own vision that I got during this period. And I did this about 10 years ago, and it has informed so much of my own thinking. Without me actually realizing it, I only remembered about this a couple of months ago. And the first part of it is that we're starting here, and and that's my one gripe with new Belgian breweries that talk about thou shalt. No? You all know the finger. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not drink beer on Sundays. Thou shalt not love your neighbor if your neighbor happens to be of the same gender. Thou shalt not love your neighbor if your neighbor happens to be of a different race. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. And we have these wonderful commandments where most of us come from, of thou shalt not do this and thou shalt not do that. And I don't know about you, but the moment somebody said to me, thou shalt not, I go, says who? You make me, you're not the boss of me. So this kind of forcing things out, and that's what our rules and regulations tend to do, is they say, thou shalt not. Now, I come from a country where people put a lot of effort into figuring out how to go around the rules, how to not look at the rules. You know, we went for margaritas the other night in this wonderful little place down here, and they have a 3 margarita rule. They make delicious margaritas. So, of course, we wanted more than 3, and no, there's a 3 margarita rule. And I said, well, what happens if I now pay my bill, go out, come back, sit at another table, can I have another 3 margaritas? Because that's the way that you think, you know. The moment somebody says you can't do this, you figure out a way to go around this to get what you want. So what we really need to do is to start saying, well, what am I personally committing myself to? And that's the key that organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous and many of those kind of programs have figured out, is that if you want true, meaningful change in a person's life, that needs to come from inside. It needs to be your own personal commitment. You have to feel inside yourself, I want to make that change. And it's not easy, so it's okay to just get up in the morning and say, just for today. I will do this just for today. So I'm on this little mountain quest of mine, sitting there waiting for the rain that didn't come. I came up with my own personal list of commandments and commitments. And I'll share them with you. These are mine. You're welcome to use them. You're welcome to come up with your own. But the key thing is to sit there and think about what is the kind of world that you choose. And what do you need to do to create that world? What is it that you need to do to regenerate this sad and sorry world of ours? And then stick it up somewhere, on the fridge, on the bathroom mirror, you know, where you put your affirmations. And just ask yourself at the end of the day, how many of these did I do? How many of these did I achieve? Now, some days, I have to be honest, I don't make one. Some days I make all 10 of them, and then it's time for a margarita. But the point is that you try every day. And as I'm trying it and as you are trying it, and there are lots of people all over the world, and there are wonderful places on the web where you can link into this kind of thinking. Now, go out and there's a website where you can link up to this group that's, what do they call themselves? It's sort of a Be Kind to Grumpy Old Men Fridays. So you can sign up and you can go out and be kind to grumpy old men on Fridays. You can go out and have a hug mob, a flash mob where people go out and you give people free hugs. It can be as simple as putting post-it notes up in the bathroom saying, you're actually okay. You're beautiful. Just something that makes people smile, that makes people think. Small things. And there are so many of these things that you can link up to. And if we all start doing it, we can see the change. And I can already, in the years that I've been working in this field, see how things have changed. And it has happened because there are more and more people who are starting to think this way, who are saying, I want to make a positive contribution. I want to leave a positive legacy to the children of the future. And that is your role in a regenerative world. Because ultimately, as Marianne Williamson say, the revolution that will save the world is a personal one. And with that, I thank you.
So thank you, Chrisna. And I did say, please generate some questions, so we have some time for questions. Anyone have one on the tip of their tongue?
We talked a lot about regeneration, and you mentioned getting back to what it was before. And my question would be is, when is that time, or how do you define what that time is?
That's the thing, is regeneration is not about going back to the way things were before. We cannot go back. Now, Heraclitus, the philosopher, said that no man can step into the same river twice. It's simply, we cannot go back. There is no back. There is only the future. And regeneration is about how do I take what is now not working and regenerate it to create something new that is healthy, that is nourishing, that is fulfilling, that is beautiful. That's what it is about.
Would you say that regeneration should mimic nature directly, or do you think it should be designed to be better?
Well, I think it can learn from nature. I think also that we have to be careful about what it is that we mimic about nature. If you mimic something from nature that comes from a desert-like area and you try and apply those same lessons in the jungle, you're going to run into trouble. You have to look at your environment, at the place where you are, and what makes sense in that place. What are the lessons that nature teaches you about where does the water go? What kind of plants thrive here? Where does the wind come from? How have people survived there? How does the creatures build? Where do the birds put the entrances to their nests? Because they know which way the winds come. So it's not a mimicking, it's a learning from nature. It's not saying that I'm not just going to copy this and take things over. It is literally about how do I look and I engage with how nature solves problem at this particular place. And this is the other thing, this is a very place-bound thing. It's not about saying, well, now here we have the 10 rules of regeneration, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this, like we have with things like some of our building assessment systems, which shall remain nameless. So if you do all of these things, it'll work. So we end up in a place like Pretoria with these wonderful buildings that are totally, wonderfully insulated. They will survive any North American winter, except that Pretoria never gets cold. And as climate change is coming in, it's going to get really, really hot. So all these buildings that are supposed to be really energy efficient are now going to use more and more energy so that they can run all these wonderful air conditioning systems of theirs, because you can't open the windows. It's an example of how we've transplanted a solution that may have worked in one place and one time to another place in another time. And regenerative design and development is not about that. It is about being rooted in the place where you are and learning how you engage with that place in an effective manner. You had a question.
Yes, I mentioned that fundamental thing of regeneration to consume, to satisfy the increasing social needs and desires, wants. And the developing countries still need to use the nature to grow their economies. And only the minorities, including the people here, have this strong eco-awareness, and the majority still do not have enough knowledge of this, awareness of this. And what are those effective approaches to change people's mind?
Yes, that's a long question, and there are so many assumptions in that question. Well, it basically goes around, it's basically around the fact that in developing countries, people still sitting at a basis of consumption where they feel they've kind of been left behind, and they want to consume, they want to improve their lives, they want to be able to live like most of you and myself live. And for that, they need to use resources, so they're going to continue doing that, and they see no need why they have to be environmentally aware, because they feel kind of left behind and they need to do this. So how do you change those minds? How do you get them to understand that this is not a sensible route to follow? And it is a really tricky one. And I think part of it becomes through helping them to go back to their own cultures. Because most of those cultures have a tradition of living within their means. They have a tradition of being frugal with resources. They have a tradition of respecting, of engaging in some spiritual practices like meditation or martial arts, or even their traditional ceremonies that roots them in place. And a lot of that has been fallen by the wayside and has been sort of passed away because of the huge influence that the West has in terms of its media and in terms of its consumption. I mean, we are living the kind of luxurious lives that kings didn't live in the past. And now the rest of the world also wants to live like that. But if you look at, there's the Global Happiness Index, or the Global Planet Index, yes, where they look at the various aspects of people's footprint or countries' footprint and their levels of happiness and their levels of income. The top 10 countries in this year's Global Happiness Index all come from developing countries. It comes from a place where people say, you know, if I have to choose between working 60-hour weeks so that I can get the latest iPad, and that means that I will not be able to engage in my familial relationships. I cannot have my family rooms. I cannot look after my children. I will have to work too hard. You know, I can't take siesta, because many of these actually come from Latin America. And they said, you know, this doesn't make sense. So I get enough. And I think that's the concept that we need to get, is that what is enough and what is it that gives real happiness? And maybe that's a role that the West, with its enormous media machines, can start playing, is to start saying, but you know, you don't need all of this to be happy. And I don't think that it's just a situation in developing countries. I also think that for the next generation in Europe and in the United States, they are going to learn that, you know, we cannot have the kind of lives that our parents had. The economy is not going to carry this, because the economy is rooted on the environment and on those natural resources that has now been taken out. So whether they like it or not, we are running into those barriers. And we are going to get to a point, and I see this in my own country, where we are getting more and more violent protests because people cannot consume at that level. But the reality is, we are running into those barriers. So how do you start engaging? And it's not a technology thing, it is a mind thing. And I think it's one of the most difficult things is how do you do that? And the only way you can do that is by setting an example, about saying, this is what I think. You know, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to other people. Write in the newspapers, make documentaries. Talk about what it is that is really important in life. And I think we've forgotten what it is that is really important. And hopefully say, well, you know, there are ways that you can have a very good quality of life. You don't need to suffer and have poor drinking water, But you don't also need to be rich to have good drinking water. You just have to look at how you treat your water sources. What is it? Where does it you get your money, your income from? We have a mining town in South Africa called Carolina, which sits in what is the South African version of the Lake District. Beautiful, beautiful lakes, very pure water, water sources that feeds most of the agriculture of our grain baskets in the country. But it's also in an area that is very richly endowed with coal. So in the past few years, we've had huge open-cast coal mines coming in. And it's now gotten to the point where the people of Carolina who work in the coal mines no longer have clean water. And I'm not talking about not having clean drinking water. I am talking about water that is not safe to wash your clothes in, to stick your hands in. So they are sitting with this dilemma of what do we choose? Jobs? The jobs in the coal mines that has been promised to us? Or having water to drink? Having food to eat? And is there a different way of growing food, of making sure that you have food to eat, that you have meaningful existence without, because I don't think working in a coal mine is a particularly meaningful job. So is there another way to achieve your objectives? And that goes back to understanding what it is, what is the objective that you want to achieve? Why is it that you want this big car? Why do you want a big car? Is it because you want to feel like you're very important, you want to show your friends that you've got somewhere, you want to feel safe? What is the emotion that you are trying to make with this car? And I think in many of the developing world, that emotion is to say, look, we are no longer backwards. We have shown the West that we are human beings that have worth. It's not about consumption. It's not about having those things. It is about saying, look, I have worth. I mean something. I am recognized. I am not the animal that the colonial masters have told me that I will be. I am not the animal that my oppressive government has said that I am. I'm backward. I should only stick in this. I have agency. I can make a change. I can do something about my life. And that's the kind of emotion that underlies most of our consumption. And maybe if we can tap into those underlying emotions in ways of satisfying those underlying emotions and coming up with things that will satisfy, whether those are ways, practices of agriculture, practices of communication, education, but ways that will help people to satisfy those things in ways that is regenerative, that will create a better world. I mean, you've got an example in Fort Colorado with your, why do I say Fort Colorado? Fort Collins in Colorado. In Fort Collins with your, a number of the small businesses that you have here, where people have started businesses in times when it was economically very bad. And they've come out with wonderful regenerative projects. Great technologies, things that will help to make the world a better place. So they've taken that need to create a better life for their families and use that to create something that is good. Now you may argue in New Belgium breweries whether a brewery is a good thing or not. But the fact is that their business philosophy is helping a lot of people. It is an entity within this town that is actually helping the town to regenerate. And that does things in a way that is energy efficient, that gives back to nature, that doesn't take from nature, that creates more than there was before. And if we can find ways of showing people in the developing world that there are ways of creating industries, creating businesses, creating jobs, but in technologies or in processes or in ways that gives back more than it takes, then we can do that. But if we just say, well, you can go ahead and consume because people in Europe and America are now they're forced to reduce their consumption levels because of the economy, but the rest of us can go out and we can put things in place so that we can get to the same level as where Europe and America is, we are going to run into serious problems. But I think there's enough messages of hope out there, and there's enough examples of how to do things in a way that is regenerative, that one can take that to the rest of the world and say, but look, this is best practice. This is, if you really want to be the leaders of the world, this is how you need to do it. And I think in that way we can start slowly making those kind of changes. So I've been pontificating on that.
So I think what we'll do, there still is, the cash bar is set up out there. Well, Chrisna can be here for another 15 minutes or so. So if you have individual questions for her, we'll move ourselves out into the reception area and you can have a chance to ask her or Dominique questions. You know, we have been blessed today by having someone who has spoken to the United Nations, who's spoken on 6 different continents, taking her message to so many different people who have had a chance to hear it. Now that we've had a chance in our campus and in our community to hear it, I think we owe her a very good round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Okay, so see you out there, and thanks for coming.
Ah.